What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks into what he thinks is a friendly interview, only to find himself facing a relentless interrogation that pushes him to his absolute breaking point? Today, we're diving into the moment Samuel L. Jackson had enough of Joy Behar's tactics and delivered a response that left the entire studio speechless. Before we get into this incredible exchange, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because this story will have you questioning everything you thought you knew about live television interviews. The atmosphere in the View studio felt different that morning. Samuel L. Jackson had agreed to appear on the show to promote his latest film, expecting the usual mix of light banter and promotional questions that come with daytime television. He settled into his chair with his characteristic calm confidence, exchanging pleasantries with the panel as the cameras rolled. Whoopi Goldberg offered her warm welcome, and the other hosts seemed genuinely excited to have him there. But Joy Behar sat with a different energy entirely, her notes spread before her like weapons waiting to be deployed. "Samuel, it's wonderful to have you here," Whoopi began with genuine warmth. "Your new film looks absolutely incredible. Tell us about stepping into this character." Jackson smiled, launching into his prepared talking points about the complexity of the role and the collaborative process with the director. His voice carried that familiar gravitas that had made him one of the most recognizable actors of his generation. The conversation flowed naturally for the first few minutes, with questions about his preparation process and working with his co-stars. Then Joy Behar leaned forward, and the temperature in the room seemed to shift. "Samuel, I have to ask you about something that's been bothering me," she interrupted, cutting off his response about working with young actors. "You've made a career out of playing these aggressive characters, these angry men who solve problems with violence. Don't you think that sends a dangerous message, especially to young black men who look up to you?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Jackson's expression didn't change immediately, but those who knew him well might have noticed the slight tightening around his eyes. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Joy, I think you're oversimplifying both my career and the intelligence of audiences," he replied evenly. "I've played complex characters across decades of film. Some have been dealing with anger, yes, but that's because anger is a human emotion that deserves exploration, especially when it comes from places of injustice or systemic oppression." Behar wasn't satisfied. She shuffled her papers with theatrical importance, clearly prepared for this moment. "But come on, Samuel. Snakes on a Plane, Pulp Fiction, these iconic roles where you're screaming and cursing and being violent. Young people see that and they think that's how they should handle conflict. First of all," Jackson's voice remained controlled, but gained an edge. "Those are vastly different films, with completely different contexts. Pulp Fiction was a meditation on moral ambiguity and consequences. And suggesting that young people, particularly young black people, can't distinguish between fiction and reality is pretty condescending, don't you think?" The other hosts began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Whoopi attempted to redirect the conversation, but Behar pressed forward like a prosecutor, sensing weakness in a witness. "I'm not being condescending, I'm being realistic," she shot back. "When you have the platform you have, when you have the influence you have, especially in certain communities, don't you feel a responsibility to choose roles that uplift rather than reinforce negative stereotypes?" Now Jackson's famous composure began to crack, but not in the way Behar might have expected. Instead of raising his voice, he became more deliberate, more focused, like a sniper adjusting his scope. "Joy, let me ask you something," he said, leaning forward slightly. "Have you actually watched my films, or are you basing this entire line of questioning on headlines and movie trailers? Because if you had done your homework, you'd know that I've spent decades portraying characters who fight against injustice, who protect their families, who stand up for what's right, often in impossible circumstances." Behar's face flushed slightly. "Of course I've seen your movies. That's exactly why I'm asking these questions. The language alone in some of these films. Oh, matey, 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 end of. The language," Jackson repeated, his voice carrying a dangerous quiet. "You mean the way real people actually talk when they're facing life and death situations? The way characters speak when they're dealing with trauma, with poverty, with violence that's been inflicted upon them?" You want me to sanitize that reality to make you more comfortable? I want you to acknowledge that words have power, Behar fired back, and that when you use certain language, particularly language that has been used to demean and dehumanize people, you're normalizing it. The studio fell silent except for the low hum of cameras and equipment. Jackson stared at Behar for a long moment, and those watching could sense something building beneath his controlled exterior. "So now you're going to lecture me about the power of words?" he said slowly, each word measured and precise. "You're going to sit there and tell me, a man who has lived through actual discrimination, who has faced real prejudice, who has used his craft to illuminate the experiences of people you've never bothered to understand, that I don't comprehend the weight of language?" Whoopi tried again to intervene. "Maybe we should talk about the new film." But Jackson wasn't finished. "No, Whoopi, let's finish this conversation. Because Joy here seems to think she has something important to say about my choices and my impact on my community." He turned back to Behar, his gaze unwavering. "Tell me, Joy, when was the last time you spent any real time in the communities you're so concerned about? When did you last have a meaningful conversation with a young black person about how they interpret art and media?" Behar's mouth opened and closed, like she was searching for words that wouldn't come. The confident interrogator from moments before seemed to shrink under Jackson's steady gaze. "I talk to people all the time," she managed weakly. "What people?" Jackson pressed. "Your friends in Manhattan? Your colleagues in media? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you've formed your opinions about my work and my impact from a very comfortable distance. And now you want to use this platform to publicly shame me for choices you don't understand in contexts you've never experienced." The tension in the studio was now palpable. Camera operators glanced at their producers, unsure whether they should keep rolling or cut to commercial. The other hosts sat frozen, watching this verbal chess match unfold in real time. Behar's face hardened as she realized she was losing control of the narrative she had carefully constructed. "Samuel, you're twisting my words. I'm simply saying that with great power comes great responsibility, and your platform." "My platform," Jackson interrupted, his voice cutting through her attempt to regain footing. "Let's talk about platforms, Joy. You've been sitting at this table for years, speaking for and about communities you're not part of, making judgments about art and artists you clearly haven't taken the time to understand. What gives you the authority to determine what's appropriate for black audiences? What makes you think you're qualified to police black artistic expression?" The question landed like a physical blow. Behar's prepared talking points seemed to evaporate as she faced the direct challenge to her credibility. "I'm not trying to police anything. I'm asking legitimate questions about social responsibility." "No, you're not," Jackson replied, his tone growing more pointed. "You're performing moral superiority for your audience. You brought me here under the pretense of discussing my new film, then ambushed me with a lecture about how I should conduct my career to meet your standards of appropriateness. That's not journalism, Joy. That's grandstanding." Whoopi attempted another rescue. "Samuel, I think what Joy is trying to say." "Whoopi, with all due respect, Joy is perfectly capable of saying what she means," Jackson said without taking his eyes off Behar. "The problem is, what she means is becoming very clear, and it's not pretty. She wants to put me in a box, to reduce decades of work to a few convenient sound bites that support her narrative about violent black men in media." Behar's face flushed deeper red. "That is absolutely not what I'm doing. I would ask these same questions of any actor. Would you?" Jackson's voice carried a sharp edge of skepticism. "Have you ever asked Robert De Niro about the impact of his violent roles on Italian Americans? Did you grill Al Pacino about Scarface's influence on young Latino men? Have you demanded that Quentin Tarantino explain how his films might negatively affect white audiences?" The silence that followed was deafening. Behar opened her mouth, but no words emerged. Around the table, the other hosts exchanged uncomfortable glances, realizing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Jackson continued, his voice gaining momentum. "Or is this particular concern about media influence something you reserve specifically for black actors? Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like you've appointed yourself the arbiter of what's appropriate for my people to see, hear, and create." "Now you're being ridiculous," Behar snapped, her composure finally cracking. "This isn't about race. This is about social responsibility. Everything is about race when you make it about race, Joy, Jackson shot back. You didn't invite me here to talk about social responsibility in general. You specifically targeted me, a black actor, to answer for playing complex, flawed human characters who happen to be black. You want me to apologize for not being Sidney Poitier in every single role, for not presenting the sanitized, palatable version of black masculinity that makes you comfortable. Behar's voice rose defensively. I never said anything about Sidney Poitier. You're putting words in my mouth. Am I? Because your entire line of questioning is based on the premise that my portrayals of black characters are somehow inherently more dangerous or irresponsible than anyone else's portrayals of their characters. You've decided that when I curse on screen, it's setting a bad example, but when other actors do it, it's just acting. The studio audience, which had been mostly quiet, began to stir. Some viewers were clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, while others seemed transfixed by Jackson's methodical dismantling of Behar's position. That's not fair, Behar protested. I'm asking about your specific influence because you have a specific platform in the black community. And there it is, Jackson said, a grim smile crossing his face. My specific platform in the black community, as if I'm somehow more responsible for black viewers than any other actor is for their audience. As if black people are less capable of critical thinking, less able to separate entertainment from reality, more susceptible to being corrupted by what they see on screen. I never said that, Behar insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. You didn't have to say it explicitly, Joy. It's been the subtext of everything you've said since you started this line of questioning. You've treated me like I'm corrupting the youth of America with my mere existence in these roles, while giving a free pass to countless other actors who portray equally complex, equally flawed characters. Sarah Haynes finally spoke up, trying to inject some levity. Maybe we can all agree that art is supposed to provoke discussion, right? But Jackson wasn't ready to let Behar off the hook. Sarah, art absolutely should provoke discussion. But what Joy is doing isn't discussing art. She's trying to shame me for creating it. She wants me to defend my right to portray the full spectrum of human experience just because those characters happen to look like me. Behar, sensing she was drowning, made one last desperate attempt to regain control. Samuel, I think you're being overly sensitive. I ask tough questions. That's what I do. The words hung in the air like a match thrown into gasoline. Jackson's expression shifted. And for a moment, everyone in the studio seemed to hold their breath. Overly sensitive, he repeated slowly. A black man standing up for his artistic integrity and refusing to be lectured by someone who clearly hasn't done her homework is being overly sensitive. That's your professional assessment? I didn't mean it that way. Behar backpedaled quickly, realizing her mistake. How exactly did you mean it, Joy? Because it sounds like you're using a very familiar playbook. When a black person refuses to accept your characterization of their work, when they push back against your attempts to diminish their contributions, suddenly they're being overly sensitive, too emotional, too angry. Sound familiar? The other hosts were now visibly squirming in their seats. The interview had gone completely off the rails, and there was no graceful way to recover. Behar looked around the table desperately, searching for support that wasn't coming. I think we should move on, she said weakly. Oh, now you want to move on? Jackson's voice carried a tone of dangerous amusement. After you've spent the last 10 minutes trying to tear down my career and question my integrity, now you're ready to talk about something else? That's convenient. Jackson leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Behar's increasingly uncomfortable face. No, Joy, we're not moving on, because this is exactly the problem. You think you can ambush someone, make sweeping judgments about their character and career, then simply change the subject when your arguments fall apart. That's not how this works. Behar's voice cracked slightly as she tried to regain her footing. Samuel, I was just trying to have a meaningful conversation about media representation. Meaningful conversation? Jackson's laugh was sharp and humorless. You call this meaningful? You came armed with talking points designed to make me look irresponsible and dangerous. Then when I refused to play the role of the apologetic black actor, you want to pretend this was all just innocent curiosity? The studio cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of what was quickly becoming television history. The audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing something they had never seen before on daytime television. Let me tell you what meaningful conversation looks like, Joy, Jackson continued, his voice gaining power with each word. Meaningful conversation would have involved you actually watching my films, understanding the contexts in which these characters exist, recognizing the difference between an actor and the roles he plays. Meaningful conversation would have acknowledged the decades of work I've done both on screen and off to support and uplift communities. Behar tried to interrupt. Samuel, I have watched your films. Have you? Jackson's voice cut through her protest like a blade. Have you watched The Long Kiss Goodnight? And seen me play a devoted father willing to sacrifice everything for his family? Have you seen Coach Carter, where I literally played a man dedicating his life to keeping young people on the right path? Did you watch The Sunset Limited and appreciate the philosophical depth of that character's struggle with faith and despair? With each example, Behar seemed to shrink further into her chair. The other hosts exchanged glances, realizing they were witnessing a masterclass in how to dismantle bad faith arguments. Or maybe you saw Changing Lanes, where my character learns about redemption and personal responsibility? Jackson pressed on relentlessly. Did you notice the complexity in The Caveman's Valentine, where I portrayed mental illness with dignity and humanity? What about my work in Freedom Land, dealing with the pain of community tragedy? Those are good examples, Behar managed weakly. They're not examples, Joy. They're proof that you didn't do your homework. They're evidence that you built your entire attack on a foundation of ignorance and assumption. You reduced my entire career to a few convenient stereotypes because it served your narrative. The energy in the studio had shifted completely. What had started as Behar's attempted ambush had become Jackson's complete domination of the conversation. His voice carried the weight of decades of experience and the authority of someone who had faced real discrimination. But here's what really bothers me about this whole exchange, Jackson continued, his tone becoming more intense. It's not just that you were unprepared. It's not just that you tried to embarrass me on national television. It's that you did it while hiding behind the pretense of social consciousness. You wrapped your ignorance in concern for the community, as if you were doing some kind of public service. Behar's face had gone pale. Samuel, that wasn't my intention. Your intention doesn't matter, Joy. Impact matters. And the impact of what you've done here today is to perpetuate the exact kind of thinking that has held back artistic expression in Black communities for generations. You've appointed yourself as the judge of what kind of Black stories deserve to be told, what kind of Black characters deserve to exist. Jackson's voice rose slightly, but it was controlled, purposeful. You want to talk about responsibility? Let's talk about your responsibility. You have a platform that reaches millions of people. You have the power to shape conversations. And you chose to use that platform to attack a Black artist for refusing to stay in the lane you've decided is appropriate for him. The silence in the studio was profound. Even the technical crew seemed frozen, afraid to make any noise that might interrupt what was unfolding. You know what the real tragedy is here? Jackson asked, his voice dropping to a more conversational tone that somehow carried even more weight. There are actual problems in media representation that deserve serious discussion. There are real issues about how stories are told, who gets to tell them, and what voices are elevated or silenced. But instead of engaging with those complex realities, you chose to go for the cheap shot, the easy target. Behar looked around the table desperately but found no allies. Whoopi was staring at her hands. The other hosts seemed transfixed by Jackson's performance. You want to know about my responsibility to young people? Jackson asked rhetorically. My responsibility is to show them that Black men can be complex, that we can be angry and gentle, violent and tender, flawed and heroic, sometimes all in the same story. My responsibility is to refuse to be reduced to the comfortable stereotypes that make people like you feel safe. His voice gained momentum again. My responsibility is to demonstrate that when someone tries to diminish you, when they try to put you in a box, when they try to make you apologize for your excellence, you stand up and you speak truth. That's what I'm doing right here, right now. The camera captured Behar's face, which had cycled through confusion, defensiveness, and was now settling into what looked like resignation. She had been thoroughly, completely, and publicly dismantled. So Joy, let me ask you a question, Jackson said, leaning forward slightly. What's your responsibility here? What's your responsibility to your viewers, to the artists you invite on this show, to the communities you claim to care about. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've failed in all of those responsibilities today." Behar's mouth opened, but no words came out. For perhaps the first time in her television career, she was genuinely speechless. "I thought so," Jackson said quietly, sitting back in his chair with the satisfaction of someone who had just delivered a masterpiece. The studio remained silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air like smoke after battle. Whoopi finally found her voice, though it was shaky. "We're going to take a quick break." But Jackson wasn't quite finished. As the show prepared to cut to commercial, he looked directly into the camera, addressing the audience at home. "To everyone watching, remember this moment. Remember what it looks like when someone tries to tear you down and you refuse to let them. Remember that your art, your voice, your truth matters, regardless of who tries to silence it." The camera lingered on his face for a moment longer before finally cutting away, leaving viewers with the image of a man who had just reminded everyone exactly why he was one of the most respected actors of his generation. That's the story of the day Samuel L. Jackson absolutely erupted on The View, not with screaming or theatrics, but with the kind of controlled, devastating precision that only comes from years of experience and unshakable confidence in one's own worth. Make sure to subscribe for more incredible moments like this, and comment below, what do you think Joy Behar learned from this exchange?